The mansion was silent that morning, but not the kind of silence that comforts. It was the heavy, tense kind, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, anticipating something that was about to unfold. He entered as he did every day, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble floors, each step precise and calculated, the embodiment of order, control, and routine. He expected the usual, the house immaculate, the reports waiting on his desk, the aroma of coffee wafting gently through the halls. But today something was different. The air felt thicker, charged with a subtle tension that prickled at the edges of his awareness. Small footprints, smeared and uneven, marred the pristine marble floors. Their presence was almost jarring, out of place in the meticulous environment he had built for his family. And then came the sound, a high-pitched, frantic cry that pierced the air, cutting straight through the calm facade of the house. His heart skipped a beat. A chill ran down his spine. Every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. He followed the sound, his steps faltering only slightly as the panic began to rise inside him. At the end of the hallway he saw her, the cleaner, kneeling on the ornate Persian rug in the main living room, cradling his 3-year-old son in her arms. The child's small body trembled, feverish and weak, and yet there was a strange serenity in the way she held him, a calm determination that seemed impossible under the circumstances. His first reaction was disbelief, quickly followed by anger. The scene in front of him seemed almost surreal. How could this happen under his watch? How could she, someone he always saw performing simple household tasks, suddenly possess such control over a life so precious, so delicate? What's going on here? His voice was sharp, authoritative, but beneath it lurked the tremor of panic. Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering. No fear, no hesitation, only determination. "He needs help, now," she said, her voice calm but piercing, each word cutting through his shock like a blade. He tried to form a coherent thought, but his mind was a storm of fear, pride, and disbelief. She was not a doctor, not a trained professional. How could she know what to do in a life-threatening situation like this? And yet, here she was, presenting a solution, a lifeline that seemed to defy logic. He took a cautious step forward, his gaze locked on her movements. A thought struck him with terrifying clarity. Perhaps he had misjudged her, but pride fought back, stubborn and sharp. He had spent decades building his life on certainty, control, and a hierarchy that left little room for unpredictability. And now, in the span of a single morning, someone he had always seen as just staff was holding the power to save, or fail to save, his son. "She needs a transfusion, and you can help," she continued, her eyes burning with quiet resolve. He almost fell backward, in disbelief. "You? How could you possibly?" His voice faltered. He looked around desperately, expecting to see a nurse, a doctor, anyone else. But there was no one. Only her, only the woman he had never imagined in a role so critical, so life-altering. Perfeito. Vou criar uma versão muito maior da parte 1 em inglês, expandindo ainda mais contexto, suspense, pensamentos, flashbacks e emoção, mantendo a narrativa contínua, dramática e envolvente, aproximando-se de 2.500, 3.000 palavras, pronta para vídeos longos e emocionais. Part 1. The millionaire accused the cleaner. But the truth about his son left him in tears. Extended English version. The mansion was silent that morning, but not the kind of silence that comforts. It was the heavy, tense kind, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, anticipating something that was about to unfold. He entered as he did every day, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble floors, each step precise and calculated. The embodiment of order, control, and routine. He expected the usual, the house immaculate, the reports waiting on his desk, the aroma of coffee wafting gently through the halls. But today, something was different. The air felt thicker, charged with a subtle tension that prickled at the edges of his awareness. Small footprints, smeared and uneven, marred the pristine marble floors. Their presence was almost jarring, out of place in the meticulous environment he had built for his family. And then came the sound, a high-pitched, frantic cry that pierced the air, cutting straight through the calm facade of the house. His heart skipped a beat. A chill ran down his spine. Every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. He followed the sound, his steps faltering only slightly as the panic began to rise inside him. At the end of the hallway, he saw her, the cleaner, kneeling on the ornate Persian rug in the main living room, cradling his 3-year-old son in her arms. The child's small body trembled, feverish and weak, and yet there was a strange serenity in the way she held him, a calm determination that seemed impossible under the circumstances. His first reaction was disbelief, quickly followed by anger. The scene in front of him seemed almost surreal. How could this happen under his watch? How could she, someone he always saw performing simple household tasks, suddenly possess such control over a life so precious, so delicate? What's going on here? His voice was sharp, authoritative, but beneath it lurked the tremor of panic. Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering. No fear, no hesitation, only determination. "He needs help. Now," she said, her voice calm but piercing, each word cutting through his shock like a blade. He tried to form a coherent thought, but his mind was a storm of fear, pride, and disbelief. She was not a doctor, not a trained professional. How could she know what to do in a life-threatening situation like this? And yet, here she was, presenting a solution. A lifeline that seemed to defy logic. He took a cautious step forward, his gaze locked on her movements. A thought struck him with terrifying clarity. Perhaps he had misjudged her, but pride fought back, stubborn and sharp. He had spent decades building his life on certainty, control, and a hierarchy that left little room for unpredictability. And now, in the span of a single morning, someone he had always seen as just staff was holding the power to save, or fail to, save his son. "She needs a transfusion, and you can help," she continued, her eyes burning with quiet resolve. He almost fell backward in disbelief. "You? How? How could you possibly—" His voice faltered. He looked around desperately, expecting to see a nurse, a doctor, anyone else. But there was no one, only her, only the woman he had never imagined, in a role so critical, so life-altering. His chest tightened. Memories of the past assaulted him, the endless hospital visits, the high costs of treatments, the helplessness he had felt in the face of his son's frailty. Each recollection was a sting, a reminder of his limitations despite all the wealth he had amassed. And now, faced with a choice he had never anticipated, he realized how utterly powerless he truly was. The thought of losing his son consumed him with an intensity that shook him to his core. The child's cries intensified, each sound a direct stab to his heart. He wanted to act, to take charge, to assert his authority, but something in her composure stopped him. It was not just skill, it was instinct, courage, and a deep reservoir of love that he could see radiating from her every movement. He stood frozen, a spectator to a miracle he could not yet comprehend. She began preparing the transfusion with methodical precision, each motion deliberate, careful, imbued with a confidence that defied her lack of formal training. He watched, mesmerized, as her hands moved deftly, connecting tubes, checking vitals, and speaking softly to the child, who slowly began to respond. For the first time he felt a glimmer of hope, fragile but persistent. Time seemed to stretch into an eternity. Each second crawled forward, weighted with suspense. He gripped his own hands, the tension in his body almost unbearable, as he watched her work tirelessly, seemingly unfazed by the stakes. Then he heard her words, clear and unwavering. "I know this is frightening, but stay calm. He will get through this." Something within him shifted. The anger, the suspicion, the disbelief, they all began to dissolve in the presence of her unwavering dedication. He realized painfully that he had judged her based on superficial notions, on titles and social status, and almost let that judgment cost him everything he held dear. Minutes passed, each one dragging as if to test his resolve. And then, slowly, the child's cries softened, his breathing became steadier, his small body beginning to regain warmth and color. Relief washed over the father in a tidal wave, overwhelming every other emotion. Tears streamed down his face, not of sorrow, but of gratitude, humility, and awe. He felt the weight of his own misconceptions, his pride and his arrogance crumble under the sheer force of what had just occurred. He approached, trembling, and took the woman's hand in his own, words failing him. I was wrong. I never imagined someone could do this for him." His voice broke, choked with emotion. She smiled, serene, without expectation of reward or recognition. Her love, her courage, her unwavering commitment had spoken louder than any title, any wealth, any social position could ever convey. The days following that unforgettable morning seemed almost surreal, like a dream stretching endlessly. The mansion, usually a silent fortress of routine and predictability, hummed with a subtle tension, a quiet acknowledgement of the miracle that had occurred within its walls. Every corridor, every marble staircase, every sunlit room seemed imbued with a lingering sense of reverence, as if the house itself understood that life had been preserved by an act of quiet, extraordinary heroism. He walked through the halls with a newfound heaviness in his chest, each echo of his polished shoes a painful reminder of the fragility of life. Every step brought the memory of the day back with acute clarity. The frantic cry of his son, the sight of the maid kneeling on the rug, holding his child in her arms, her calm face a stark contrast to the panic raging inside him. He could still see the precise, delicate way she prepared the transfusion, the focus in her eyes, the steady hands that defied every expectation he had held. Initially, he avoided her. Pride, disbelief, and a gnawing sense of inadequacy kept him from expressing even the simplest of gratitude. He wandered through the mansion, replaying the events over and over, a mixture of shame and awe gripping him with every memory. How had he been so blind for so long? How could someone he had so routinely dismissed as just a maid possess such courage, intelligence, and presence of mind in the face of his son's life hanging in the balance? Every detail haunted him. The flicker of sunlight through the grand windows casting shadows across the nursery, the muffled cries of panic he had first heard, the almost imperceptible hum of the life-saving machine she had set up. It was as though every element of that morning had been orchestrated to teach him a lesson he was now forced to confront. For the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless and utterly humbled. As he lingered in his thoughts, he began to recall countless small interactions he had overlooked. The way she gently comforted his son when he was upset, the soft words she offered during bedtime, the meticulous attention she paid to every detail of the household. He realized now that these were not simply routine acts of duty. They were reflections of a character defined by empathy, patience, and courage. He had ignored these signs, blinded by the hierarchy he believed defined value. One afternoon, compelled by a mixture of curiosity and lingering guilt, he approached the nursery. The golden afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the room in a warm glow. His son was playing on the floor, his laughter echoing like music after days of terror. And there she was, kneeling beside him, guiding his small hands, adjusting the collar of his tiny shirt, speaking to him with the gentle authority of someone who understood both his fears and his needs. He froze in the doorway, watching her, his chest tight with conflicting emotions. Relief, awe, guilt, and admiration collided within him. "He's doing well," she said softly, looking up. "The danger has passed." Those simple words struck him harder than any accusation or reprimand ever could. They encapsulated a truth that no money, power or influence could ever buy: the preservation of life through courage, selflessness, and unwavering dedication. He felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. The realization of her actions, the sheer magnitude of her courage, overwhelmed him. For the first time, he understood that true heroism does not seek recognition. True heroism manifests in quiet acts, driven solely by necessity and compassion. She had stepped into the void where others would have faltered, risking herself for the life of a child she did not know in a profound way, for a family she had been taught to serve. That evening, he found himself wandering the hallways, lost in thought. He remembered the panic, the accusations he had nearly hurled, and the moment when he had finally given her permission to act. How easy it had been to doubt her, to assume she lacked the capability or knowledge to intervene, and yet in her hands a life had been preserved, a boy who might not have survived otherwise. The weight of his misjudgment bore down on him with relentless force, a lesson in humility he could not ignore. Over the next few days, he watched her from afar, noticing every detail of her interactions with his son. Each gesture, each word, each subtle act of care spoke volumes. He saw her guiding him through meals, encouraging him during play, quietly ensuring he took his medication without complaint. Every day, she displayed a quiet, unwavering vigilance that he had once dismissed, a dedication that surpassed any expectation. And with each observation, his admiration and his remorse grew exponentially. In his private moments, he reflected on the fragility of life and the unpredictability of circumstances. He thought of the countless emergencies, the near misses, and the moments of despair that had plagued his family before. He realized that in every crisis, it was not wealth, power, or influence that saved lives, but the courage and humanity of those willing to act, even when unrecognized. And he knew that the maid before him embodied these qualities more than anyone he had ever encountered. One particularly quiet afternoon, while the boy napped in the sun-drenched nursery, he approached her directly. The sunlight framed her figure, casting long, soft shadows across the floor. He struggled to find words, feeling the weight of his own pride and ignorance pressing down on him. Finally he spoke, his voice hesitant, almost broken. I owe you more than I could ever express. I judged you unfairly, and yet you saved my son's life. I have no words. Weeks that followed, their relationship evolved subtly but irrevocably. He began to seek her counsel on matters beyond the household, listening to her observations, valuing her opinions, and realizing that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources. Every conversation with her revealed insights that challenged his worldview, expanded his understanding, and slowly eroded the arrogance that had defined him for so long. His son thrived, each smile and laugh a testament to her unwavering dedication. And each moment he spent observing her interactions with the boy deepened his respect. He was learning lessons in humility, compassion, and gratitude that no formal education or experience in business could ever have taught. He began to see the profound value in observing the quiet strength of those around him, in appreciating acts of selflessness that often went unnoticed. The experience also forced him to confront his own mortality, fears, and the limitations of his control. He realized that life's outcomes are fragile and unpredictable, often dependent on the courage and decisiveness of others. And in recognizing this, he understood that his previous measures of worth, money, status, influence, were insufficient and often irrelevant. True value lay in the heart, in the willingness to act in the service of others, in moments that demand courage without recognition. As he watched her guide his son through playtime, he recognized that she had become more than an employee. She had become a guardian, a teacher, a source of moral clarity in his life. Her actions had shattered his assumptions and reshaped his understanding of humanity. And in that reshaping, he felt the first stirrings of profound change, a transformation of perspective that would influence every aspect of his life going forward. Even the household staff noticed a subtle shift. He treated her with a new respect, acknowledged her efforts, and spoke of her actions with admiration rather than condescension. The atmosphere of the mansion began to change, imbued with a sense of recognition that valor and humanity often transcend hierarchy. He realized that leadership was not solely about authority or control, but about recognizing and valuing the courage and wisdom of those who act with integrity. And yet, despite this growing respect and admiration, he felt a persistent tension, a gnawing unease that refused to dissipate, a lingering question that haunted him from the quietest corners of his mind to the very core of his being. How could he ever fully reconcile his previous arrogance, his unthinking judgments, and the countless moments he had allowed pride and preconceived notions to cloud his perception of others, with the profound lessons he had now been forced to confront? How could he honor the extraordinary heroism she had displayed, the courage that had preserved the life of his beloved child, while simultaneously acknowledging with stark clarity the depth of his own misjudgment and the years he had spent undervaluing, dismissing, or even silently disparaging her presence and contributions? These questions clung to him relentlessly, surfacing at unexpected moments, in the quiet of the morning as he walked past the polished marble floors, in the stillness of the night as he listened to his son's steady breathing, in the sudden flash of memory as he recalled the desperate cries, the frantic rush, the instant when the fear of losing his child had eclipsed all else. Each day became a mosaic of reminders, each small moment a subtle echo of that pivotal morning, teaching him lessons he could not ignore. A smile from his son, pure and unguarded, broke through the fog of lingering guilt and opened a window into the miracle of survival. A quiet word, softly spoken by her as she guided the child through play or comforted him during moments of uncertainty, revealed a depth of empathy and care that transcended duty, a profound moral strength that shone even in the most ordinary tasks. A simple act of foresight, arranging his son's toys, preparing meals, adjusting a blanket just so. Each gesture, though seemingly minor, became a marker, a silent testament to her unwavering courage, compassion, and vigilance. And through these daily observations, he came to a slow, almost painful realization that true heroism, the kind that defines character and leaves an indelible mark on lives, is often invisible, hidden within the fabric of everyday actions, until it is revealed in moments of extraordinary crisis, when the resilience, selflessness, and moral fortitude of a person are put to the ultimate test, defying every expectation and leaving observers transformed in ways they never could have anticipated. The tension within him grew not from fear, but from awe and introspection, a recognition that his life, his assumptions, and even his understanding of human value had been fundamentally flawed. How many times had he looked past the quiet strength of those around him, failing to see the wisdom in their words, the intelligence in their actions, the humanity in their simple yet profound gestures? How many opportunities for genuine connection, for gratitude, for acknowledgement of true worth, had slipped away, unnoticed, while he clung to superficial measures of success and judgment? These reflections pressed upon him with increasing intensity, urging him to observe more closely, to listen more attentively, to value more deeply, not only the woman who had saved his child, but also the countless unseen acts of courage, kindness, and insight that so often go unrecognized in everyday life. He began to notice the small details with a newfound clarity: the careful way she adjusted his son's hair in the morning, the gentle encouragement when the boy stumbled during play, the patient guidance as she taught him lessons of empathy and fairness even in the smallest interactions. Every movement, every word, every subtle glance carried layers of meaning he had never before perceived, and in these layers he saw reflections of the lessons he himself had overlooked for so long. The power of humility, the necessity of compassion, and the transformative impact of recognizing and valuing the humanity in others, regardless of their status, occupation, or perceived worth. And yet, the weight of self-awareness was both enlightening and almost unbearable. He wrestled with waves of shame for his previous blind pride, remorse for the countless instances he had underestimated the people around him, and gratitude so immense it seemed almost impossible to articulate. He understood now that life is a delicate balance of courage and humility, of action and reflection, and that true greatness is measured not by wealth, power, or recognition, but by the willingness to act with integrity, selflessness, and moral clarity, especially when the stakes are impossibly high. For those watching, the lesson resonates far beyond this particular household, far beyond the life of a single child, far beyond the dramatic moment of crisis that had revealed the heroism of one seemingly ordinary woman. How often do we, in our own lives, overlook the courage, wisdom, and compassion present in the people around us? How often do assumptions, prejudice, or pride blind us to the quiet acts of heroism that shape futures, save lives, and transform hearts? How often do we fail to recognize that greatness is not always visible, that the most profound impact often comes from those we least expect, whose contributions may appear small or inconsequential until the moment arrives that reveals the extraordinary depths of their character? This story serves as a mirror, reflecting back to us the ways in which our judgments and perceptions can be flawed, and challenging us to cultivate a deeper awareness, a sharper appreciation, and a more empathetic understanding of the people whose lives intersect with our own. It reminds us that acts of courage and love, no matter how seemingly insignificant, ripple outward, leaving indelible marks on those who witness them and on the very fabric of life itself. And it challenges us to ask ourselves, when faced with uncertainty, when confronted with the suffering or vulnerability of others, will we act with courage, compassion, and integrity, or will we be blinded by pride, fear, or indifference? Through his observations, reflections, and slowly evolving interactions with her, he came to see that life's most profound lessons often arrive in forms that defy expectation. They are found not in grand gestures of wealth or prestige, not in the accolades of society, but in the quiet, steady courage of those who act selflessly, in moments that test the very limits of the human spirit, and in the ability to recognize and honor that courage when it appears before us. The realization was transformative, reshaping not only his perceptions of others, but also his understanding of himself, his responsibilities, and the values by which he wished to live. And as he watched her day after day, guiding, protecting, nurturing, and quietly inspiring, he understood that her heroism was not an isolated event, but a continuous expression of her character. Every day became a lesson, every interaction a reminder, every smile or gentle word a testament to the power of empathy, moral courage, and selflessness. He understood that the debt he owed was not merely one of gratitude, but of profound recognition and change, an acknowledgement that the world is richer, safer, and more compassionate when such individuals are valued and celebrated, and when their acts of courage are honored, not overlooked. The days and nights following the life-threatening incident with his son became an endless loop of reflection, observation, and emotional upheaval. The mansion, a place once defined by routine, luxury, and an almost sterile predictability, now felt alive in a different way, a presence that seemed to hum with the memory of that fateful morning. Every echo of footsteps, every slant of sunlight through the enormous windows, every flicker of shadow across the polished floors carried reminders of the fragility of life and the extraordinary courage of the woman who had saved it. The man could no longer walk these halls in indifference. Each room whispered the truth he had struggled to accept. He had been blind, prideful, and wrong. At first he found it almost impossible to face her directly. The guilt weighed him down with a heaviness he had never known. He remembered in vivid detail the moment panic had gripped him, the piercing scream, the sight of his child's pallor, the rapidity with which fear consumed his every thought. He had wanted to blame, to accuse, to find some tangible reason for the near tragedy, but in the end, the reality he faced was far more humbling. He had been powerless. It was not his money, nor his influence, nor his status that had saved his son. It was her calm determination, her skill, her courage, and her willingness to act when others would have frozen. Memory after memory surfaced, each more painful and illuminating than the last. He thought back to countless times he had dismissed her advice, ignored her suggestions, or failed to recognize the value of her presence. He recalled moments when he had subtly judged her for her position, for her attire, for her quiet demeanor. Every overlooked act of intelligence, every ignored word of wisdom, every moment of unappreciated dedication now struck him with acute clarity. How many opportunities had he wasted to see the truth in front of him? How many lessons had passed unnoticed because he measured people through the lens of status rather than character? He remembered vividly the morning of the crisis, the rush of adrenaline, the overwhelming fear of losing his child. The details replayed in his mind. The boy's labored breathing, the frantic uncertainty of the nurses called to the room, the chaotic urgency of the moment, and then her hands, calm, sure, precise, moving as if time itself bent to her will. He remembered the sound of her voice, steady, comforting, commanding, guiding the life-saving process. Each motion was deliberate, every word carefully chosen, and in that critical hour she became the only anchor between life and death. The realization hit him harder than he could ever have imagined. She had not only saved his son, she had revealed the limitations of his own humanity. In those moments, he confronted the truth about himself, his arrogance, his blind judgments, his lack of appreciation for the courage and wisdom of others. He was forced to acknowledge that his power, wealth, and social standing meant nothing in the face of life's fragility and the moral fortitude of a single, humble individual. As days passed, he began to observe her more closely. Each small gesture became a testament to her character. How she gently adjusted his son's clothing, how she guided him through play, how she ensured that every meal, every rest, every tiny need was attended to with patience and meticulous care. Even in the absence of crisis, her heroism was present, not in grandeur, but in consistency, attention, and love. And with each observation, his guilt deepened, alongside a growing sense of admiration that he could not contain. He remembered nights when he had lain awake, haunted by the possibility that his son might not have survived. The memory of fear, sharp and paralyzing, never left him. He replayed the horror, the helplessness, the panic that had taken over his senses, and yet, in these same memories, he now saw clarity. The one who had acted with courage and skill was not himself, but the woman he had undervalued. Every act of bravery, every calm decision in the storm now stood in stark contrast to his previous assumptions about worth, courage, and intelligence. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the nursery, he watched her play. With his son, her attention was gentle, her movements deliberate, and her patience limitless. Every smile from the child, every laugh, every gesture of joy became a living testament to her influence. The man felt a deep, almost overwhelming recognition of his own failings. All the pride, all the assumptions, all the moments of dismissive judgment flashed through his mind like lightning. And he knew, with a clarity he could not ignore, that he owed her more than he could ever articulate. More than gifts, more than words, more than acknowledgement alone could convey. Yet despite this growing respect and awe, he felt a persistent tension, a gnawing sense of inadequacy that refused to dissipate. How could he reconcile the man he had been with, the man he was now trying to become? How could he honor her heroism and recognize the depth of his own misjudgment simultaneously? These questions pressed upon him relentlessly, surfacing in every quiet moment, driving him to reflect deeply, to observe more keenly, and to confront uncomfortable truths about pride, bias, and human fallibility. Each day became a mirror, reflecting not only her courage but his own limitations, forcing him to reassess the measures by which he had judged value, worth, and character. He began to notice nuances he had never seen before, how she balanced attention between the child's needs and the intricacies of the household, how she handled small emergencies with calm efficiency, how she infused compassion into every action without seeking recognition or reward. Every detail revealed layers of wisdom, empathy, and moral strength that surpassed anything his wealth or status could achieve. He realized that true greatness is often invisible, revealed only in moments of crisis or in the quiet consistency of selfless action. Even simple interactions became profound lessons. The way she responded to the child's whims, guided him through learning, or comforted him in moments of discomfort, all became markers of courage, patience, and intelligence. He began to see that heroism is not always dramatic. It often resides in steadfastness, in the quiet presence of someone willing to act with integrity, love, and courage when circumstances demand it. And with each observation, he felt both shame for his past arrogance and inspiration for the man he could strive to become. Flashbacks of his earlier judgments haunted him. He remembered dismissing her warnings about minor details in the past, ignoring advice that could have prevented mishaps, and assuming that only those with authority or prestige were capable of meaningful contribution. How blind he had been. And yet, these reflections also sparked a determination to change, to see the world through a lens of humility, respect, and genuine appreciation for the quiet strengths of those around him. Over time, he began to engage her more meaningfully. He asked for her perspective on decisions, sought her counsel on the child's well-being, and listened intently to her suggestions on household matters. Each conversation revealed wisdom, foresight, and moral clarity that astonished him. He realized that true intelligence and value are not always visible through conventional lenses. They often manifest in empathy, experience, and the courage to act selflessly in moments that demand it. The child thrived under her care, and with every milestone, the man's admiration deepened. Every laugh, every playful interaction, every small achievement became a living testament to her heroism. And yet, the deeper lesson was not only about the child's survival, it was about transformation, about learning to see with humility, to value with insight, and to act with moral clarity. Each day brought new reflections. He observed the subtle ways she infused patience and empathy into her work, guiding not only the child, but the household itself toward harmony. Even mundane tasks became opportunities to witness her character. The gentle folding of laundry, the careful organization of supplies, the tender way she ensured the boy felt safe and loved. He began to understand that heroism is not confined to dramatic gestures. It lives in consistency, in integrity, in love that acts without expectation. He reflected on the fragility of life, the unpredictability of events, and the limitations of his own power. No amount of wealth, influence, or authority could substitute for courage, compassion, and moral action. And in recognizing this, he felt a transformation taking root within himself, a reshaping of values, priorities, and perspective. He knew he could never repay her, yet he vowed silently to honor the lessons she had imparted through action, example, and unwavering dedication. The weeks had transformed into months, yet the weight of the extraordinary events that had unfolded lingered like a quiet, omnipresent hum throughout the mansion. Each corner, each shadow, each familiar object reminded him of the fragility of life, the power of courage, and the humility he had been forced to embrace. The father, once defined by pride and arrogance, now walked with an awareness of responsibility, empathy, and the profound importance of recognizing the unseen heroism that shapes lives. He observed his son, now thriving in ways that had seemed impossible in the darkest moments of his illness. Every giggle, every tentative step, every word spoken with curiosity and joy reminded him that life is both fragile and miraculous. A delicate balance sustained not only by chance, but by the selfless actions of those willing to put their courage, skill, and heart at risk for the well-being of another. And she, the maid, the quiet, steadfast, seemingly ordinary woman, remained at the center of it all, the invisible force whose dedication had shifted the course of their lives forever. Yet, even as gratitude swelled in his heart, he felt an urgency to reconcile the past with the present. The memories of his previous judgments, the accusations he had once thrown with blind certainty, and the moments of arrogance that had clouded his perception of her now collided with a deep, almost overwhelming reverence. He knew that mere words could never suffice. He needed to demonstrate his understanding, his humility, and his appreciation in ways that were tangible, sincere, and enduring. One quiet evening, he approached her while she tended to his son's bedtime routine. The boy, lulled by her gentle voice and tender care, yawned and stretched, unaware of the monumental conversation unfolding nearby. The father cleared his throat, his chest tight with emotion, and began, "I have spent months reflecting on the day that changed everything, on the fear, the panic, the helplessness. And I have spent even more time reflecting on myself, on my arrogance, my blindness, my inability to see your true worth. I cannot fully express the depth of my gratitude, nor the profound lessons I have learned because of you. You have not only saved my son, you have saved me, from ignorance, from pride, and from the limitations of a narrow perspective." She looked at him, calm, eyes reflecting neither judgment nor pride, but a quiet understanding. "What mattered," she replied, her voice soft yet unwavering, "was that he survived. That was the only priority. Everything else is secondary." Her words pierced through him, more powerful than any declaration of gratitude he could offer. The simplicity, the clarity, and the moral strength behind. Her statement revealed a depth of character that far surpassed any social convention, accolade, or expectation. He realized that the acts of true heroism rarely demand recognition. They simply demand courage, compassion, and action. And she had embodied all three without hesitation, fear, or expectation. The father, moved beyond words, knelt beside her, taking her hand gently in his. "I understand now," he whispered, "that true greatness is not measured by wealth, status, or recognition. It is measured by the courage to act selflessly, the integrity to do what is right, and the compassion to care for others, even when it is inconvenient, unnoticed, or dangerous. You have taught me that lesson in the most profound way possible." Tears welled in his eyes, unrestrained, as he felt the enormity of his transformation. The humility he had struggled to attain now settled into his bones, a deep, unwavering acknowledgement of the lessons learned and the profound truth of her heroism. He recognized that life is defined not by possessions or influence, but by the courage, love, and integrity demonstrated in moments that test the human spirit. The child, sensing the emotion in the room, crawled into his father's lap, wrapping tiny arms around him. The man held his son close, feeling both the immense relief of survival and the profound gratitude for the woman whose courage had preserved that life. In that moment, the household seemed to resonate with a quiet harmony, the convergence of love, bravery, and moral clarity that had been forged through crisis, struggle, and reflection. Days passed, each filled with continued observation, learning, and reflection. He noticed the subtle ways she influenced his son, not through grand gestures, but through patient guidance, empathy, and the consistent modeling of courage and moral integrity. Every moment became a lesson, a reflection of the extraordinary power of ordinary actions, amplified by love and commitment. He found himself striving to emulate her example, to act with deliberate compassion, to listen with patience, and to value every act of heroism, no matter how small or unseen. External pressures continued to test him. Friends, colleagues, and extended family often questioned his reliance on someone they deemed ordinary. Some insinuated criticism or doubt, failing to understand the profound impact of her actions. Yet he now knew that true judgment resides not in societal assumptions, but in the recognition of integrity, courage, and selfless dedication. The lessons he had learned were immune to external skepticism. They were etched deeply into his understanding of humanity, parenting, and moral responsibility. The father began to take deliberate steps to honor her in ways that were both public and private. He ensured that her contributions were recognized within the household, advocating for her respect among the staff and subtly encouraging acknowledgement from those outside. Yet he understood that her actions were never about recognition, and he approached this task with careful reverence, aiming not to diminish her humility, but to ensure that the ripple effects of her heroism were appreciated by those whose lives she had touched. There were moments of reflection when he considered the fragility of life, the unpredictability of circumstances, and the suddenness with which the world can shift. He realized that every life, every action, and every decision carries consequences that may be invisible until the critical moment arises. And in recognizing this, he understood that moral courage, empathy, and selfless action are the truest measures of human worth. One afternoon, while walking through the gardens with his son and the maid, he paused and looked at her with profound respect. "You've not only saved my son," he said softly, "but you've saved me from ignorance, from pride, and from a life defined by shallow assumptions. I will never forget this. I will never fail to honor the lessons you've taught me through your courage, patience, and integrity." The maid, ever composed, simply smiled, a quiet acknowledgement of understanding rather than praise. "That is enough," she said. "The rest is in how you live your life from this day forward." And so he did. He lived with humility, gratitude, and intentionality. He modeled respect, courage, and compassion for his son, teaching by example the lessons that had been so dramatically imparted by the woman who had forever changed their lives. He acknowledged the extraordinary impact of her heroism in private and in subtle public ways, ensuring that the values she embodied, selflessness, moral courage, and empathy, would continue to resonate long after the crisis had passed. For those witnessing this story, the lesson is clear. Heroism is not always grand or visible. Wisdom, courage, and integrity often reside in the most unexpected individuals, and their actions, though sometimes quiet and unnoticed, shape lives in profound and lasting ways. True greatness is measured not by wealth, status, or recognition, but by the courage to act selflessly, the integrity to do what is right, and the love that guides every decision. And as the father, the maid, and the child walked through the sunlit garden, he understood that the world is profoundly shaped by such acts of quiet courage and selfless dedication. He vowed to live in a way that honored these lessons, ensuring that gratitude, humility, and moral clarity guided his actions, decisions, and relationships. In the eyes of his son, he saw the reflection of life's potential for goodness, and in the quiet strength of the maid, he saw the embodiment of heroism that would forever inspire him to be better, to do more, and to live with the depth of empathy and courage he had once overlooked. The story closes not with a final act of drama, but with a quiet affirmation of life, transformation, and moral awakening. The child thrived. The father grew into a man of humility and wisdom, and the maid continued her selfless care, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of all who had witnessed the extraordinary power of courage, empathy, and quiet heroism. And for those who hear this tale, the invitation is simple. Look closely, value deeply, act selflessly, and recognize the extraordinary in the ordinary. Comment, share, and reflect upon the heroes in your own life, those who act not for recognition, but because their courage and love demand it. Subscribe, like, and join a journey that honors humanity at its most profound, reminding us all that heroism lives in every act of compassion and integrity, waiting to transform lives in ways we may never imagine. Months had passed since the fateful day when life had hung by a thread for his son, yet the memory of that morning remained as vivid as the sun streaming through the mansion windows. Each moment, each heartbeat, each small act of attention reminded him of the fragility of life, the unexpected courage of the woman he had once underestimated, and the moral lessons that had reshaped his very being. The opulent walls that had once echoed with authority, pride, and routine now vibrated with the hum of transformation, reflection, and the quiet power of human connection. He observed his son as he played in the nursery, full of energy, laughter, and curiosity, and felt a surge of gratitude that pierced his chest. The child's resilience, the brightness in his eyes, and the ease of his movement reminded him daily of the extraordinary intervention that had preserved not just life, but potential, joy, and innocence. And at the center of it all, she moved with the effortless grace and unwavering dedication of someone whose actions transcended expectation. The maid, once an unremarkable presence in the grand mansion, had become the axis on which the survival and transformation of their lives turned. Despite the joy, a constant reflection gnawed at him, a quiet acknowledgement of his own failings, past arrogance, and the missed opportunities to see her true worth. He replayed moments where he had been dismissive, judgmental, or indifferent, each recollection bringing both shame and clarity. These reflections did not immobilize him, rather they drove him to change. He understood now that wealth, influence, and societal status were meaningless in the face of true courage, wisdom, and moral integrity. His path forward demanded humility, gratitude, and recognition of the extraordinary acts that often go unnoticed. Each day became a lesson in observation and learning. He noticed how she taught his son patience, empathy, and courage, not through overt instruction, but through example, gentle guidance, and consistent care. Every meal she prepared, every story she told, every moment of play and comfort revealed layers of wisdom, compassion, and strength. And he began to see how profoundly these small, deliberate acts shaped his child, not just in health and safety, but in character and resilience. Yet the transformation was not without its challenges. External pressures persisted. Relatives who questioned his reliance on someone they deemed ordinary, friends who whispered about propriety and hierarchy, and societal norms that undervalued humility and moral courage in favor of wealth and appearance. Each challenge, however, became an opportunity for him to act differently. He responded not with defense or confrontation, but with recognition, respect, and advocacy for her abilities and contributions. Slowly, he began to see that true leadership and greatness reside in the acknowledgement of value where it exists, irrespective of status, background, or societal perception. One evening, as the sun cast golden light across the garden, he watched his son chase after a butterfly, laughter ringing in the air. The maid knelt to adjust his little jacket, her movements precise, gentle, and patient. He approached them quietly, feeling a swelling mix of gratitude, humility, and awe. He knelt beside her, taking her hand softly into his, and spoke with a voice trembling with sincerity. "I have spent months reflecting on the day that changed everything, on the fear, the panic, and the helplessness that gripped me. And I have spent even more time reflecting on myself, on my arrogance, my blind judgments, my inability to recognize the truth before my eyes. You did not just save my son. You revealed the limitations of my own humanity. You showed me courage, patience, and love in ways I could not have imagined. I am eternally grateful, and I vow to honor these lessons every day of my life." She met his gaze calmly, her eyes reflecting neither pride nor expectation, only a quiet acknowledgement. What mattered, she said simply, was that he lived. That was the priority. Everything else is secondary. Her words struck him with profound force. The simplicity of her perspective, the moral clarity and the selflessness behind her statement made every previous assumption, every judgment, and every act of arrogance he had committed seem insignificant in comparison. He realized that the truest acts of heroism are often invisible. They require neither recognition nor reward, only courage, integrity, and a commitment to act when it is needed most. Tears blurred his vision as he reflected on the months of transformation. He had learned that wealth and status mean nothing when faced with the fragility of life, that humility is earned through experience, and that true greatness is measured by the courage to act selflessly, the moral clarity to do what is right, and the love that informs every decision. His son's survival was more than a miracle. It was a lesson in morality, empathy, and human potential. As the boy clung to him, sensing the emotion in the room, he felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and resolve. The mansion, once a house of cold routine and silent hierarchy, now echoed with the rhythm of life, care, and moral. Awakening, every corner, every shadow, every sound carried the imprint of courage, compassion, and quiet heroism. The father began to intentionally embrace these lessons, not only in words but in actions. He involved himself in his son's upbringing alongside the maid, learning to balance guidance with patience, discipline with empathy, and authority with humility. He ensured that her contributions were recognized, advocating for respect and appreciation without diminishing her humility. Each interaction, each decision, each shared moment became a demonstration of the lessons he had internalized. The importance of gratitude, moral clarity, and acknowledgement of true heroism. Even small gestures became profound. Watching her guide the boy through a difficult puzzle, comfort him after a minor fall, or patiently teach him a new skill, he recognized that heroism is continuous, often subtle, and immeasurably powerful. Each act, though quiet, shaped lives and transformed hearts. And he understood that the most meaningful contributions are not always visible. They are measured in lives saved, lessons imparted, and the moral courage to act when it matters most. The months continued, and with them came opportunities for reflection, growth, and public acknowledgement. Friends and relatives began to notice the subtle transformations within him, the humility, the attentiveness, the recognition of the extraordinary in the ordinary. Yet he never sought praise. His gratitude was lived, demonstrated daily in care for his son, respect for the maid, and commitment to applying the lessons learned in every aspect of life. One afternoon, as they walked through the gardens, he paused and addressed both his son and the maid. "I have learned that the greatest acts of courage are often invisible, that true greatness is measured not by wealth, status, or recognition, but by the willingness to act selflessly, to protect, to guide, and to love. Your courage, your wisdom, and your compassion have reshaped my life, my son's life, and the lives of all who witness it. And for that, I will be eternally grateful, forever vigilant in honoring the lessons you have taught me." His son, now confident and happy, reached out to her, smiling broadly. The father saw the bond between them, the transmission of courage, empathy, and integrity from one life to another, and felt the fullness of the story's impact. The maid, composed yet touched, nodded, acknowledging that the journey of heroism, humility, and transformation was complete, not in dramatic display, but in the quiet, lasting resonance of moral courage and love. For those witnessing this story, the message resonates beyond the narrative of a single household. Heroism is often quiet, unexpected, and invisible to casual observation. True greatness is measured not by accolades or wealth, but by moral clarity, empathy, and the courage to act selflessly. The story challenges us to look closer, value deeply, and recognize the extraordinary in those around us, whether a quiet maid, a loving parent, or anyone whose courage shapes lives in ways that may not always be seen. And as the sun set over the estate, bathing the garden in golden light, the father, the maid, and the child paused, each reflecting on the transformation that had occurred. The mansion, once a symbol of hierarchy, wealth, and pride, now resonated with love, moral courage, and enduring human connection. The father had been redeemed not by his own wealth or power, but by humility, recognition, and the transformative lessons imparted by someone he had once underestimated. As the story concludes, the lesson is universal. Never underestimate the quiet strength of courage, the transformative power of compassion, or the lasting impact of selfless action. Recognize the heroes in your life, express gratitude, and live with the awareness that every act of courage, patience, and love shapes the world in ways far beyond what the eye can see. For